Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jake Spiegler, and I'd like to welcome you to our 10th KM KSU webinar. I'm a graduate student in the master's program here at Kent State University, and I will be one of your event facilitators over the next year. The KM KSU webinars are an open forum for anyone engaged or interested in knowledge management or knowledge sciences. In this community, we define knowledge sciences broadly and inclusively. Events and webinars are offered to expand the dialogue and also to provide exposure to people and organizations who are doing great things in this area to advance ideas and to discuss challenges. We want this to be your forum, so we encourage you to propose events, suggest topics. As we mentioned in our kickoff section, events are not limited to presentations, but can also be open to conversations and discussions, interviews, and so on. We're receiving many interesting suggestions, and we have volunteers for another half dozen events. Please do keep the ideas coming. This is an open forum which operates under a Creative Commons governance model. It is also a community without formal funding, so I want to always take the time to acknowledge the contributions of our team here at Kent State, including Jonna Kranzico, our academic program coordinator, Nicole Stempak, another one of our graduate assistants, and Denise Bedford, our Goodyear Professor of Knowledge Management. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. Carla actively studies business model innovation, specializing in social innovation. This research has led to expertise in the anatomy of for-profit bridging organizations and the uses of external communities as a key enabler to success in their disruptive business model. She has integrated the background of knowledge management and product development processes to develop a model by which entrepreneurs can establish enterprises that work coherently with communities of like-minded people. A recent specific application of her research is to develop new business model innovations in the field of talent recruiting and human resource management. Carla will also be presenting at the European Conference of Innovation and Entrepreneurship in September 2013. Previously, Carla spent 20 years within automotive engineering and manufacturing at General Motors. She held the role of Global Knowledge Manager within GM Engineering until 2008. In this capacity, she facilitated 140 expert teams and coached a broad cross-functional spectrum of engineering disciplines globally, with the primary focus being on the contextual reuse of the enterprise's explicit knowledge and enabling effective global collaboration. She completed more than 3,500 coaching sessions, as well as sponsored and facilitated several workshops aimed at developing a common domain view for the KM International interdisciplinary professional community. And without further ado, I'd like to pass this over to Carla.
Hello, everyone. I think we're going to try to mute everybody if you wouldn't mind. There seems to be a lot of noise on the line.
There, it should be a little bit better now.
Yes, it is. Thank you very much. Okay, well, this presentation is about using appreciative inquiry methods to facilitate knowledge transfer, capture, and collaboration. And I'm just going to go put it into full screen now so that you won't be distracted by my background. And so I just wanted to quickly go over some of the way I've laid out the presentation. I'll be talking briefly about appreciative inquiry, where it began, how we ended up using appreciative inquiry in our engineering knowledge management initiative, as well as then using the appreciative inquiry as a way to facilitate knowledge capture, transfer, collaboration. And there are different kinds of ways that you can capture knowledge. For instance, if you there are two thoughts. You either go in and you interview individuals to try to capture their knowledge, or you actually facilitate communities of practice so that they become owners and collaborators of their own knowledge. They encapsulate and become the active members of that knowledge creation. And so basically, this is the flow of what I'm going to be presenting in the seminar today. And we'll be going through some steps and methods as well using appreciative inquiry further on in the presentation. I just wanted to start out by asking a question, and unfortunately, when I'm in full screen, I don't see my little boxes so that I can't see who's answering. But could I have a couple volunteers to tell me, did you have anything go wrong at work yesterday or today or on your way home? would anybody be willing to participate and tell us what kind of went wrong yesterday?
I'll volunteer.
Okay, who's volunteering?
This is Edwin K. Morris.
Well, hello, Edwin. How are you?
Doing well. It's
Good.
a simple thing, but it seems complicated sometimes. Just lining up teleconferences and that sort of thing. I slipped the gear and missed the time zone, and I've done that twice this week. Just can't figure my own time zone and the adjustment. So that's my issue.
Yep, I've done that too. Anybody else have something that just kind of didn't go well, or they heard something that was distressing that they really couldn't control? Nobody ever, nobody? Seriously? Well, all right, we'll just go on to the next slide. No one's brave. That's not good. Okay.
Well, they also might be muted and not realize it. So.
Oh, okay. Apparently, you can unmute at will.
You should be able to. The call-in users, I will have to unmute myself, I think.
All right. Well, that's fine. We'll just go ahead and go on. Appreciative inquiry actually was developed by David Cooperrider, for those of you who aren't familiar with the concept. And in 1986, he actually began to conceptualize the idea of, you know, instead of looking at the deficit or problems, focusing on deficits and problems when you're doing organizational development, it's better to shift your focus to an enabling state. So he was really trying to say that it's better to not just focus on all of the things that could possibly go wrong, but really to think about, you know, what are the best ways and what are the desired states that our businesses want to be in. And so he wrote his dissertation on appreciative inquiry toward a methodology of understanding and enhancing organizational innovation. And that's how everything sort of began historically. That's how that began. So appreciative inquiry is really the cooperative and co-evolutionary search for the best in people. And it's really not just a process to use, even though it is a process. It's called the 4D process. And I'll be reviewing that in a few minutes. But really what it is it's a state of mind, and it's really kind of an important way of interacting with people. And our environment has become so dependent on social media and these social interactions that it's extremely important that if you are facilitating any kind of collaboration activities where you're trying to get a lot of voices of many different people and you want people to cooperate with one another, this process is really helpful in keeping people focused on attaining, you know, the best solutions or the best, the highest capacity and capability. And originally this process was used for organizational development, and we kind of modified it a little bit to use these methods of appreciative inquiry as a way of doing our knowledge management within General Motors. So I'm going to talk a little bit about GM in just a moment here and how we use the process. But first, I usually have a video I show here, but since you wouldn't be able to hear the video, I decided to just show you where to go if you wanted to at least understand the concept a little bit more fully of really what's right with the world. DeWitt Jones has this great little video, and I think that it might be in the library at Kent State or in some location, but you can go to his website and they have a very short primer there about what he's meaning, is that we tend to look at the world always with a critical eye for all of the things that are going wrong, and you know, we really don't celebrate what's right with the world. and there are a lot of things that are right, even within our organization. And he as a photographer for National Geographic, this is DeWitt Jones, what he does is that, when he goes out to a shoot, he looks around and he doesn't say, there's only one good shot here. He imagines within his mind, and it's his internal construct, to think there are a million beautiful shots no matter where I look, and with people in them, without people in them, and that's really his point of view, and it encapsulates appreciative inquiry quite well. And I really recommend taking a look at the site and to get a different perspective on what appreciative inquiry really means.
Carla, really quick, do you think you could increase your volume a little bit? I've had some comments about people having a hard time hearing.
Okay. Is this better?
I'm not having trouble hearing.
Those of you who are having problems hearing me, can you hear me better now?
That sounds better.
Does it sound better? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Sorry about that. So the way we applied appreciative inquiry, or AI, in the engineering product development environment, there were some benefits actually to facilitating knowledge development this way. So we developed methods that actually were preventative over corrective. That was one of the benefits in using appreciative inquiry. So it wasn't just about doing all the corrections, but really we had a longer-term vision that was generated through using AI. We shifted the focus from problems to solutions. So it wasn't the lessons actually used to set up the context, but really the whole drive for the engineering, engineering product development process was then focused not so much on all the things that went wrong, but really on the solutions to make sure that we had first-time capability. That was extremely important. We provided a level of empirical explicit knowledge, not just tacit beliefs. And the process actually requires that you have something to start with, and I'll go through that in greater detail coming up. And we also provided a common picture for engineering practices for cross-functional communities of practice. And what that really means is that if you had many different voices, let's say if in the automotive industry you would have somebody that was in charge of doors and glass and then sheet metal, and then you would also have individuals that were concerned primarily for safety and crashworthiness and noise and vibration, and they all had voices. And what was so funny was that everyone had their own picture of what they were talking about, and the collaborations that I ran really focused on making sure that everyone had a common idea, a common picture of what it was that was going to be discussed and what they were going to be balancing. So it was extremely important, and this process is very, very, it kind of requires you to have this physical property of some kind, whether it be, it could be if you're doing market research, it could be your product, it could be anything to kind of focus the group. Otherwise, and I'm sure everyone's been in a situation where you've been in a meeting and it's all this vapor, right? I mean, there are so many ideas being thrown out and so many, beliefs and all these other things, but it becomes extremely difficult, to quantify that, to actually, build knowledge that's relevant. So it also provided a method to capture for those that had, great passion around the subject. There were other individuals that perhaps that wasn't their domain, and yet they had interest in that, and we included them in the process and were able to really garner a lot of very good information and knowledge from them. So basically, our perspective was that we wanted to make sure that we had first-time quality, reliability, and durability, and we needed to know what features to performance relationships were. And so the feature would be like a radius on a door, and performance would be an example. You wanted to make sure that it wouldn't crack, or that it would hold the glass, or it was wide enough so it would perform properly. And so these initiatives in the knowledge base, where we were facilitating these groups using this appreciative method, really did a great deal of work on defining those things. And of course, you know, it was the desired performance was actually becomes part of the final design. And those features and performance relationships ended up actually being part of our knowledge database that we had, and that also helped us to drive, drove out other discoveries, and then also, other newly discovered relationships were also brought into that. So the intent was really to have a knowledge base for, sharing and reuse. And we felt that we couldn't do everything tacitly, and particularly, if you have an environment where you have a lot of engineering, it becomes a little bit more difficult to just have tacit knowledge sharing. So we needed some physical, and I know it's not popular in KM these days to talk about explicit knowledge, but in reality, it's extremely important to have that component. So AI was used to enhance the collaborations for cross-functional knowledge construction and innovation projects. It also was used to balance engineering practices by including cross-functional voices. And if you've ever been in an environment where you're trying to collaborate with a group of people, it's extremely, you can drive an agreement between people, but the voices get lost in the final write-up. And so that's one of the things that we were cognizant of, that we wanted to make sure that those individual voices still had control over their knowledge. It was extremely important, because if something changed for them, how do you change that in the agreement? And so that's why it was extremely important to capture. So at a very high level, the collaboration and knowledge creation at GM kind of looked like this. When we began the appreciative sessions, this appreciative collaboration, everybody came in with a very unique perspective, and everybody has their own truth. And what we did in the first part of the process, which I just put the timing up here, it depended on how complex, and this is a fairly complex illustration, and there was a lot of features that they had to talk about. But generally, this first phase of using the appreciative collaboration process was about I would say 2 4-hour sessions. And during that phase, it was primarily about rapport building, storytelling, and defining the collaboration topic. Okay, so in these sessions, the facilitator was the coach. They weren't the individual that was asking them for their knowledge. They were instilling in the individuals themselves, and these folks, these brains, that they owned the knowledge, and that they needed to have a safe place to tell their truth, and in context of some kind of an illustration. It was extremely important to have this. Sometimes there would be a physical property in there, meaning that there would actually be a car part. But you had to have something for them to talk about, because the language was very different for each individual, because their disciplines are very different. So it was extremely important. And this took about 36 to 48 hours, depending on the complexity, this phase, which was the capture voice phase. So here they're storytelling. Here they're talking about, their best experiences with these features. And that's the appreciative approach. We don't have them talk about all the things that, you know, have gone awry, because there's plenty of horror stories. But they actually would talk about, you know, when they had the most ideal circumstance and what drove that circumstance. And each one of these individuals then began to learn the perspective of the other. And initially, those people never get along. I mean, they are cross-functional. They all have a different worldview. And this process was able to get them to kind of a common point and appreciation for each other's story. And so that's why this phase is extremely important. And then what we did is we captured the voices. And you could capture them through video or text or illustration. It doesn't really matter. There are many different methods to do this. And what it would be is that each person would own their own perspective, but yet it would be kept in a way that would facilitate a balance. So the next part of the process was to balance the voices, and that was our intent. Now, we didn't get very far with this part because there were so many contradicting requirements that the few places that we were able to achieve balance, it was really monumental for those teams. And the feedback to me had always been, why aren't we doing this all the time? Why aren't we looking to balance and capturing the voices and allowing these individuals here to continue to own their voices? And then you get to see what constraints each voice has. And then they needed to figure out a way to balance to deliver that content back to the end user. Now, the other aspect that this drove was that once you start to do the balancing, you find out, you know, what you still need to learn. So this drove the knowledge creation component. If there are any questions, please let me know, and we can, if you have any additional questions about this, it's a little bit complex, I know. Any questions? Okay. So who could benefit by applying appreciative inquiry to knowledge management activities? Well, there are basically two groups. You have knowledge building activities, such as you could facilitate knowledge, the AI knowledge facilitation of innovation, design for Six Sigma, or invention activities. You could use the process for that. You could also use it for knowledge capture transfer activities, such as if you find yourself in an organization that's going through mergers and acquisitions, this is an extremely important process. And I've discussed this before in other forums, that you really need to take the time to capture and transfer knowledge between the groups in order to better assimilate those individuals, and also to make sure that the knowledge that one group has doesn't disappear. There's a lot of studies out there that express the problem that when you're in that circumstance, if you don't have a way to transfer that knowledge back and forth, or at least capture it in some state, there's a great deal of capital that's lost, the intellectual capital lost that way. If you have process improvements, and also if you're trying to do knowledge automation, that's another thing that benefits from this type of appreciative approach. So as I talked earlier, there are two schools of thought. There's one that you go and interview people to capture their knowledge, and the other group of perspective is that you become a coach to help other people harvest their own knowledge. You know, you become an individual that enables their successes. And in the case of, if you're doing interviews with individuals or groups, when would you use this? You would conduct knowledge retention. You know, if you're going to be conducting any kind of knowledge retention interviews, retiring knowledge experts, when you're improving your process or practices in a group, integrating knowledge, from a merger or acquisition, and when harvesting decision trees for automation. This process actually works pretty well for that as well. The process can also be used as a method to help the teams, and that's what I was explaining earlier, is that, when you use this, if you're coaching the process to teams that need to construct knowledge, or teams that are developing innovations, or if you're coaching knowledge transfer between communities of practice. So the first step in the process, basically, when you're using AI, is you have to get ready yourself. It's one thing to try to facilitate a group of individuals. It's a whole other thing when you're not in the right frame of mind in order to do that. And the way the process works, at least the way I would facilitate it, is that you need to know about your individuals or groups that you're facilitating. A lot of contemporary wisdom says, a facilitator doesn't know anything about, the topic, and that's a good thing. But that's not necessarily the level that you need to be at. You don't need to be an expert in the topic, because that will skew, there'll be a bias. It tends to not work out the best. But what you do need to know is you have to have a systems view of their role in the organization and their process. You have to understand how they integrate and how they work with all of the other components that you're going to need to be bringing in. So there is work that the facilitator needs to do to have the systems level view of how all these parts integrate. So this is not something for someone who doesn't have any experience in the industry that you're working in to do. This is someone who's been part of many different initiatives, generally a facilitator or coach, if you'd rather call them that, and they have to have this holistic view, because they're going to be the ones that don't know enough to ask stupid questions to keep the conversation moving. So understanding the general terminology and acronyms, most commonly used by all of the groups, because each group has a different, mindset and perspective, and then using for yourself creative visualization as a practice, so that you can practice the interview and the facilitation, and then becoming an active listener. And active listening is extremely important, and I'll be covering these themes. And then understanding the importance of body language. Unfortunately, in this environment, I can't see anybody's body language, so I don't know what's being captured and what's not. This is not really a quiz, but what are the two primary roles of a facilitator? One thing that a facilitator is to keep them, meaning if you're interviewing or if you're kind of facilitating group collaboration, you have to keep them in an appreciative state of mind, always focused on the desired state. What happens all too often is that if you're not a strong facilitator, the individuals tend to go into this really negative storytelling. It becomes more of all the problems that they've ever had, instead of keeping them focused on, the desired state. And your job is to keep them talking. You have to keep those individuals comfortable, keep we call it keeping the mental door open, keeping your mental door open. If you start to have like a certain kind of body language, or if you go in and you're not having fun, or you're starting the day on the wrong foot, that's going to translate over into how those individuals see you. So they need to feel that you care about them if you're doing this on a one-on-one circumstance. I'm from the perspective that knowledge managers within organizations, or whatever, if you're doing anything related to knowledge awareness or capture, that it's not about extracting knowledge from someone. It's more about enabling them to communicate that and to own that and to feel comfortable sharing that knowledge. It's not, that's a little bit different perspective than if you're going in and you're trying to understand your decision trees, and prescribe, write a prescription for that knowledge. So using creative visualization, this is not a new concept. Many people in sports use this. There are a lot of athletes that use this guided meditation and visualization, and there are several studies that talk about the importance of that, and this technique is extremely important for the facilitator because it's important to kind of like feel the event beforehand. And I know this sounds a little bit strange, but the study that was done, this was done quite a long while ago, and the outcomes of the study for the creative visualization in sports was that the Russian scientists compared 4 groups of Olympic athletes. And the first group did physical training, okay? So they ran every day, ran. The second group, 75% did the physical training, and 25% of the time they did some mental training. So in other words, they visualized themselves, running, finishing the race, and how it felt, and what did it smell like, and they could smell the sweat. I mean, it's quite visceral. And the third group did 50-50, and the fourth group did only 25% physical training and 75% mental training. And the interesting thing was that group 4, actually were the ones that those mental images had, can you imagine that it had impacted their physical training, and that through that imagery they were able to get the same muscle impulses as they were if you were actually running. So your mind is extremely important when you're doing it, thinking about life in an appreciative way. Creative visualization is extremely important to get yourself prepared for doing any kind of facilitation. The next thing would be body language. Body language is extremely important as well. And body language tells you a lot about whether or not the person is anxious, whether or not they are telling the truth. And in my full class, I actually have a video that I go through so that you can see what you're talking about, what to look for when you're working with teams. People who tend to cover their chest, are feeling a little uncomfortable, even though they may say, I'm just, that's how I always sit. Then they're always a little uncomfortable, apparently. But anyhow, it's extremely important to look at body language, because that really does convey a great deal about what's happening in the environment. So as a facilitator, one of the things that's extremely important to understand is that you need to understand inquiry scenarios. Because depending on what the responses are during either interviews or collaborations, if people are taking the topic off track, meaning, or they're giving you an off-track response. So if you're actively listening and you're noticing that you're getting some other stuff, you need to look at the chart. This chart actually can help you to understand these styles of inquiry are ways to get people back on track and continue talking, right? What did I say? One of the primary things is that the facilitator needs to be always keeping people talking. So if you have a clear response but it's too general, there are methods called verbal nudging or clarification, or if you're requesting an example, these things help to move the team or the group back on track or to provide you with, more detailed information. Okay, instead of just opinions, and it helps to focus them. This is extremely important in active listening. So, appreciative inquiry has a 4D model. It's discovery, dream, design, and destiny. And so the way we use the process is that discovery is the very first phase. In this phase, you help to define and clarify common languages of all the participants. You provide an opportunity to level set cross-functional perspectives, and that's what I was speaking of earlier, where you have everyone tell their truth. And then you provide a graphic representation of some kind that will support the understanding. And that's the very, very discovery phase. That's the first phase in appreciative inquiry. And that kind of sets the tone for everything that happens after. The dream phase is where you actually have the cross-functional team prepare their shared understanding. So what would the future look like if you could change this one thing? Teams begin to do a different kind of storytelling, and they look for ideal futures. Now, conventionally, when you're in a business environment, it's really hard if you're doing organizational development to do this process. But if you're doing knowledge capture or transfer, this is absolutely possible, because what this will yield is the best solution in a given context. And so this, you help them by writing vignettes and other things to help them to say, if we did it this way and all the voices, had these constraints and these balances, and you balance during the dream phase. So you help to balance everybody's perspective. So step 2, the rapport and discovery, that's discovery. You practice active listening and be aware of your group, body language. Keep the storytelling going, right? Using the inquiry styles. Keep them moving, keep them talking, have them use graphics, whatever it takes to keep that environment active. Give everybody a voice. And that's one of the important things that on the onset that you need to describe the appreciative process. And it's really kind of an interesting thing, because people actually by the second session really feel that they're learning a lot from everyone else, because they're actually listening for the first time and not just talking or reacting or having to compromise their position. So establishing common vocabulary is extremely important in this phase, making sure that you have the scope, the knowledge can be transferred and created and harvested, making sure that key participants are there. That's another problem, is that sometimes the key participants aren't all there, and you need to make sure that if you don't have them there, that they at least have a way to make their voice, include their voice in whatever it is, the collaboration or the knowledge capture. And then selecting a common way to illustrate it. And again, there's that illustration component. Again, it's extremely important. Don't let it just be verbal. You need to have it down in an explicit way for them, because it won't be real unless it's explicit. In step 3, you begin the facilitation of the interview. You practice, of course, every time active listening. You're always looking for, people who are going either off topic, and then you help move them, or people who are feeling, if you're looking at the body language and you start to see people, not participating, you use those different methods in order to get them moving again, get them talking again. Keeping storytelling going and so forth. You're doing brainstorming within the constraints. And so that helps the individuals to kind of, there's a cohesion that occurs in the group at that point. And then you have the teams present their shared vision. The last two phases of the 4D process that can be used is that the design phase and destiny. And what the design phase is that you actually put together a tactical plan and develop a step-by-step plan to begin, initiating the transfer, capture of knowledge. All right, and then the destiny phase is really the strategic plan. So step 4 is identifying the tactical solution. And generally, when we have these, if you're doing this kind of a knowledge transfer creation, you are looking for, how are we going to get this out to the organization, and how do you inform, who needs to be informed by it, and so on and so forth. So you would put together a tactical solution, at least a short-term solution, so that all of the knowledge that was created or captured or balanced has a place to go. Because it's nothing more frustrating than all these people spending their time and then there's no tactical way to get the content to whoever needs the content. And then the final step is really to identify the strategic plan, developing a strategic plan to address the transfer of knowledge or creation of knowledge. And what you would tend to do customarily, and this is not any different really than any other process. It's not unique, but generally we stop at the tactical plan and we really don't go to the next step to make sure that you have, what will become the common and accepted way of capturing, revising knowledge at an organizational level. How are you going to make everybody knowledge aware? Are you going to use the methodology of interviewing, or are you going to become coaching the knowledge transfer capture? And how might you include other knowledge building activities and processes? So if you have Design for Six Sigma in your organization, how do you include them? How do you get them the training so that they can actually begin providing rich knowledge back into the system? And then how might we structure knowledge for reuse, revision? How do you vet the knowledge? And these are more strategic things that need to be thought about. And these teams or groups that do the 4D process within a knowledge perspective have will provide you with a roadmap for an organization to actually leverage what they learn. I find that all too often that's one of the things that falls by the wayside, is that you don't have that. So basically those are the steps, and I'm going to go ahead and put it into, okay, there we go. into this mode because it's just easier for me to talk. Are there any questions?
We did have, looks like Leanne has a question.
Leanne?
Are you there, Leanne? Can you, you can talk now if you'd like. Oh, okay, she doesn't have a microphone. I'll go ahead and read for her. Yeah.
Okay, so let me see. The questions are, how do you get around some people not wanting to input, post, posted videos? Others allow any sharing. PowerPoints. Nobody minds sharing these things. Oh, okay. generally when you're facilitating a session, and again, these are facilitated sessions. These are not, this is not just somebody in the office doing this as part of their work yet. But what we've had is we've brought in, on a few instances, the video cameras and stuff like that. And the facilitator actually makes it easy for them because you're really kind of the person that distracts them. You don't ever have the camera like on them. You might capture the entire session, and that actually is how you would do the video. I wouldn't recommend people do this at their desks, if you know what I mean. Also, I see that your slide repeatedly says writing vignettes. Okay. You never mentioned using a tape recorder. Yeah, you know what? We don't use tape. I wouldn't use a tape recorder because for some reason people freak out about tape recorders. I've done a lot of interviews, and I use my iPad, and I let them know that I'm recording, but for some reason the iPad doesn't freak them out. And that's what I use. If it were me, I would be using some kind of other device. It's more natural for them to forget that it's on. And I turn it on, and then I go back to facilitating, and it's not like this box sitting in the middle of the table. I know that sounds strange, but it really does help a lot. Vignettes are extremely important because what they do, there's two purposes for them. You can use a vignette to describe how a practice was successful. So if a whole team got together and they were able to, actually come up with a solution for something that saved a lot of money and how they saved the money and so on and so forth, those short little vignettes are really powerful. Another way is to have them write a vignette where they haven't experienced it yet, right? So they're writing a vignette of what they want to experience. So this is, what we want to experience, and this is how it is going to be beneficial and how we saved money and so on and so forth. But that's how a vignette can be used. They're just these one-page things. Okay, what else do we have? Well, to Denise, you asking me how did I create buy-in for the AI in GM. Actually, I didn't have to. We didn't tell them we were doing it. It just became the process, the appreciative process that we used in order to capture knowledge. And the reason why it was really, as they were facilitated through it a few times, they benefited so much from that they wanted to use that as the way that they handled all of their meetings. And this is a very brief snapshot of this is a much more complex process, but this gives you the high-level understanding of what occurs. There are many more things that go into if you're going to be balancing perspectives on a topic that need to happen, but we just didn't say anything. We just said this is how we're going to facilitate. We didn't call it AI. We just called it appreciative collaboration, and it worked out actually quite well. They didn't need to be incentivized to do it. Once they participated, because they had to capture the knowledge anyway in some form, then we had a process that they actually liked very, very well. And we made sure that things were not done in such a way that it was so unfamiliar to them either. So the forms were in Word and or Excel, and we didn't have them inputting into a database or anything like that. So we made it as easy for them as possible. Okay. Okay. The concern is Oh yes, I wouldn't be using the iPad for video, just only for audio. So you know, instead of videotaping, I would be using actually a camera if that's possible. It depends on your environment. If you're part of an engineering environment, knowledge doesn't change as rapidly as you would if you're in a process-driven environment. Now, process-driven environments are everywhere, but they're much more fluid, right? They're, you know, process can change very radically. But, you know, coming from an environment where you have engineering, aerospace, all of these different, you know, hard concrete, you know, even glass manufacturers have desired ways that they do it consistently. They need to understand all of the constraints around that. Yeah, so I wouldn't be using it for video, but I certainly would be using it for audio. If you would like some more information about that, I have a couple of packages I used for my dissertation capture. I captured all of my interviews using the iPad. Vignettes before the meeting, certainly you could do vignettes before the meeting, but they need to understand the process. So basically, if you start them out with storytelling, have them focus on the, you know, depending on, you know, what your industry is, what is, you know, what's the best solution that you've experienced around whatever it is you're talking about. That's extremely important. And then once they understand that, then you can have them visualize, right, a vignette for a future thing. Oh, I like that one very much. What was your approach in measuring the outcomes of knowledge activities at General Motors? When I was at General Motors, the interesting thing was that the time that it took in order to capture the knowledge that was necessary in order to get repeatable success on, you know, part development. What we ended up doing was we had a way of tracking the practices that actually got implemented on the vehicle. And so we were able to see, you know, of course, for the first 3 years, because that's how long it took to build any kind of explicit knowledge that was large enough. Oh, okay, Dean. Bye. That's how we measured. We measured where we could actually see the impact of those balanced practices on the vehicle. We would have these large sessions every quarter discussing, you know, the practices, how they were implemented, and the monies that were saved. And it was quite substantial. It was that's a big part of it, is how do you actually market those, you know, the measures, you know, how, so that people can really see that what they've worked on has been implemented. That was even more important, you know, for them. Did I miss anybody's questions? I'm sorry, I'm trying to read these as quickly as I possibly can. Some people not wanting their inputs posted on video. Yeah, I know that. I put video in there only because in this you know, new social media environment, it becomes more and more probable to do video. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody likes to do that. I do find that people really don't have a problem so much with the audio. I do translate it. So if they don't want their voice being, you know, heard, we would sit down. I would sit down with the individual. We would discuss what it was, you know, that they wanted to share. I would have illustrations there. They would talk to me about what they were, you know, passionate about and how to do it right. And then we would construct practices that represented what they said. So there, you know, you have to be flexible with those people that don't don't want that. Oh, any books? Wow. Actually, there's a handbook. There's an AI handbook, Appreciative Inquiry Handbook. It was written by David Cooperrider and Diana Whitney, I think, and Jackie Stavros. That's a very, very good book. And their perspective, though, is not from the knowledge management perspective. They really go for the organizational development. You know, how do you really change an organization to be an appreciative organization, focused on the best that people can be. You know, that's a very, very good book. Any other questions? Have I? Oh, somebody open up.
Well, if there's no more questions, then I think we can go ahead and end this webinar for today. I'd like to thank Carla so much for giving this presentation. I also would like to thank everyone who showed up and was able to put their input in.
Yes, thank you very much for attending. I'm very pleased to provide this information. And if you need to contact me, I'm on LinkedIn, and I have a blog if you want to contact me through that too. Oh, the slides. You know what I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and post the slides to, I'm trying to think of where we usually post our slides. I'll send a link to the slides, all right? And then everyone will have the presentation as well. Dressing that they really couldn't control. Nobody? Seriously? Well, all right, we'll just go on to the next slide. No one's brave. That's not good. Okay.
Well, they also might be muted and not realize it. So.
Oh, okay. Apparently, you can unmute at will.
You should be able to. The call-in users, I will have to unmute myself, I think.
All right. Well, that's fine. We'll just go ahead and go on. Appreciative Inquiry actually was developed by David Cooperrider, for those of you who aren't familiar with the concept. And in 1986, he actually began to conceptualize the idea of, you know, instead of looking at the deficit or problems, focusing on deficits and problems when you're doing organizational development, it's better to shift your focus to an enabling state. So he was really trying to say that it's better to not just focus on all of the things that could possibly go wrong, but really to think about, you know, what are the best ways and what are the desired states that our businesses want to be in. And so he wrote his dissertation very much. Okay, well, this presentation is about using appreciative inquiry methods to facilitate knowledge transfer, capture, and collaboration. And I'm just going to go put it into full screen now so that you won't be distracted by my background. And so I just wanted to quickly go over some of the way I've laid out the presentation. I'll be talking briefly about appreciative inquiry, where it began, how we ended up using appreciative inquiry in our engineering knowledge management initiative, as well as then using the appreciative inquiry as a way to facilitate knowledge capture, transfer, collaboration. And there are different kinds of ways that you can capture knowledge. For instance, if you there are two thoughts. You either go in and you interview individuals to try to capture their knowledge, or you actually facilitate communities of practice so that they become owners and collaborators of of their own knowledge. They encapsulate and become the active members of that knowledge creation. And so basically, this is the flow of what I'm going to be presenting in the seminar today. And we'll be going through some steps and methods as well using appreciative inquiry further on in the presentation. I just wanted to start out by asking a question, and unfortunately when I'm in full screen I don't see my little boxes so that I can't see who's answering, but could I have a couple volunteers to tell me, did you have anything go wrong at work yesterday or today or on your way home? Would anybody be willing to participate and tell us what kind of went wrong yesterday?
I'll volunteer.
Okay, who's volunteering?
This is Edwin K. Morris.
Well, hello, Edwin. How are you?
Doing well. It's
Good.
a simple thing, but it seems complicated sometimes. Just lining up teleconferences and that sort of thing. I slipped the gear and missed the time zone, and I've done that twice this week. Just can't figure my own time zone and the adjustment. So that's my issue.
Yep, I've done that too. Anybody else have something that just kind of didn't go well, or they heard something that was just...
Organizations and the uses of external communities as a key enabler to success in their disruptive business model. She has integrated the background of knowledge management and product development processes to develop a model by which entrepreneurs can establish enterprises that work coherently with communities of like-minded people. A recent specific application of her research is to develop new business model innovations in the field of talent recruiting and human resource management. Carla will also be presenting at the European Conference of Innovation and Entrepreneurship in September 2013. Previously, Carla spent 20 years within automotive engineering and manufacturing at General Motors. She held the role of global knowledge manager within GM Engineering until 2008. In this capacity, she facilitated 140 expert teams and coached a broad cross-functional spectrum of engineering disciplines globally, with the primary focus being on the contextual reuse of the enterprise's explicit knowledge and enabling effective global collaboration. She completed more than 3,500 coaching sessions, as well as sponsored and facilitated several workshops aimed at developing a common domain view for the KM International interdisciplinary professional community. And without further ado, I'd like to pass this over to Carla.
Hello, everyone. I think we're going to try to mute everybody if you wouldn't mind. There seems to be a lot of noise on the line.
There, it should be a little bit better now.
Yes, it is. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jake Spiegler, and I'd like to welcome you to our 10th KM KSU webinar. I'm a graduate student in the master's program here at Kent State University, and I will be one of your event facilitators over the next year. The KM KSU webinars are an open forum for anyone engaged or interested in knowledge management or knowledge sciences. In this community, we define knowledge sciences broadly and inclusively. Events and webinars are offered to expand the dialogue and also to provide exposure to people and organizations who are doing great things in this area to advance ideas and to discuss challenges. We want this to be your forum, so we encourage you to propose events, suggest topics. As we mentioned in our kickoff section, events are not limited to presentations, but can also be open to conversations and discussions, interviews, and so on. We're receiving many interesting suggestions, and we have volunteers for another half dozen events. Please do keep the ideas coming. This is an open forum which operates under a Creative Commons governance model. It is also a community without formal funding, so I want to always take the time to acknowledge the contributions of our team here at Kent State, including Jana Kranzico, our academic program coordinator, Nicole Stempak, another one of our graduate assistants, and Denise Bedford, our Goodyear Professor of Knowledge Management. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. Carla actively studies business model innovation, specializing in social innovation. This research has led to expertise in the anatomy of for-profit bridging